Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
Daniel Matthews closed the private laboratory door behind him, heart pounding as he pocketed the keycard he'd cloned from Dr. Sarkisian's workstation. The satisfying weight of it between his fingers, a small plastic rectangle representing months of careful observation and patience, felt like victory already. "Showtime," he whispered to himself, adrenaline sharpening his senses. The sterile corridor with its two bright lights and antiseptic smell held memories of his time as a respected researcher before they'd pushed him out. 3 months of careful preparation had led to this moment, infiltrating NeuroSynC's most secured research wing to steal their revolutionary medical technology. As a former research assistant dismissed for ethical incompatibility, Daniel had watched from the sidelines as the company developed and patented treatments he'd helped conceptualize. 4 minutes until the security scan, he muttered, moving efficiently to the climate-controlled storage unit. The memory of his dismissal meeting replayed in his mind. "Your contributions have been noted, Matthews, but your reluctance to explore certain applications makes you incompatible with our vision." Dr. Eliza Sarkisian's voice had been clinical, detached, as if firing the researcher who'd provided the conceptual breakthrough for their neural interface was merely pruning dead weight. At 34, his lean frame and methodical movements reflected years of precise laboratory work. His fingers, calloused from countless hours of delicate adjustments to laboratory equipment, moved with practiced efficiency over the security panel. The slight tremor in his left hand, present since childhood, seemed almost non-existent tonight, steadied by purpose and righteous indignation. The storage unit slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Inside, bathed in blue-tinted light, sat what appeared to be an ordinary metallic disc approximately 2 inches in diameter, the prototype NeuroSync device. "Hello, beautiful," Daniel murmured, his reflection ghosted on the polished surface. "They never appreciated what you could really do, did they?" The device represented years of theoretical work made manifest, a non-invasive system that could reconfigure neural pathways without surgery. His design, his theory, his legacy being quietly buried beneath corporate branding and sanitized research papers that carefully omitted his name. Daniel carefully lifted the device, its weight surprisingly substantial for something so compact. The surface felt cool against his fingertips, the microscopic circuitry patterns catching light in ways that seemed almost alive. He placed it in a specialized container designed to block its tracking signature, lined with materials he'd meticulously sourced from black market tech dealers over the past months. 2 minutes remaining, he noted, glancing at his watch. The timing had to be perfect. Security rotations, automated scanning systems, even the janitorial schedule had been factored into his plan. He'd convinced himself that stealing it was justified. The corporation had stolen his research contributions without credit or compensation. This wasn't theft. It was reclamation. "What we create belongs to all of us," he muttered, echoing Dr. Sarkisian's words from countless press releases about NeuroSynC's commitment to human advancement. The irony wasn't lost on him. As he slipped out through the service corridors, Daniel felt the weight of the device against his chest where he'd secured it. Each step carried him further from his old life and closer to what exactly? Vindication? Justice? Or something else entirely that he couldn't yet articulate. By the time the alarm sounded, he was already 3 blocks away in his nondescript sedan, heading toward the private workshop he'd prepared for examining the technology. The pulsing red lights in his rearview mirror belonged to security vehicles that would never catch him, not with the false trails he'd laid across the city's surveillance network. "Phase 1 complete," he said to the empty car, allowing himself a tight smile. "Let's see what secrets you're really hiding." The converted warehouse space contained modest but functional equipment, much of it assembled from discarded components from university surplus sales and borrowed pieces from his former employer. The concrete floor was cold beneath his feet, the single overhead light casting dramatic shadows across the makeshift laboratory he'd constructed over the past months. Daniel placed the NeuroSync device on the workbench, examining it under specialized lighting. The disk's surface featured a complex pattern of microscopic circuitry that seemed to shift subtly under direct observation, like watching oil patterns on water, never quite the same when you look twice. Quantum material architecture, he noted, connecting diagnostic equipment to the device's interface ports. His voice echoed in the empty space, a scientist's habit of narration that had never quite left him. Neural mapping capability approximately 4 times more advanced than published specifications. Of course they undersold it. Can't have the regulators asking too many questions, can we? According to the research he'd accessed, the NeuroSync created resonance patterns that could reorganize neural connections, effectively rewriting the brain's communication pathways to bypass damaged areas. But Daniel's calculations had always suggested much more extensive capabilities, applications that went far beyond the modest therapeutic uses NeuroSym had disclosed in their FDA applications. "You've got potential they never wanted to admit," he told the device, connecting the final monitoring cables. The potential applications extended beyond treating disorders to enhancing cognitive functions and possibly transferring neural patterns between compatible subjects. But that's just scratching the surface, isn't it? The holographic display hummed to life, casting his face in a blue glow as complex diagrams materialized above the workbench. Daniel's reflection in the polished surface of nearby equipment showed a man obsessed, dark circles under intense eyes, 3-day stubble framing a determined jaw, brown hair that hadn't seen proper styling in months pulled back in a functional ponytail. "Let's see what you're really capable of." His fingers danced across the keyboard, initiating the first diagnostic sequence. The device responded immediately, quantum circuitry illuminating in patterns that made his breath catch. "Well, hello there, you're even more beautiful on the inside." Daniel worked through the night, methodically documenting the device's capabilities. The warehouse's high windows transitioned from darkness to the gray light of dawn, but he barely noticed, lost in the complex dance of data streams and theoretical applications. Caffeine pills and protein bars sustained him, the exterior world fading to irrelevance compared to the revolutionary technology under his microscope. By morning, he'd confirmed his suspicions. NeuroSym had deliberately understated the technology's potential in their patent filings. The neural interface could theoretically reconfigure not just brain patterns, but potentially any system controlled by neural signals. The regulatory approval would take decades if they revealed its full capabilities, he realized, leaning back in his chair and rubbing eyes that burned from hours of unblinking focus. This isn't just about treating Parkinson's or traumatic brain injuries. This could fundamentally rewrite human physiology at the cellular level. He laughed, the sound hollow in the empty warehouse. "No wonder Sarkisian was so eager to get me out of the way. I would have insisted on transparent reporting. How inconvenient." The implications were staggering, a technology that could fundamentally alter human physiological functions at the neural level. Theoretical applications cascaded through his mind. Accelerated healing, cognitive enhancement, sensory augmentation, perhaps even conscious control over autonomic functions. "And I'm the only one who knows what you can really do," he told the device, a mixture of awe and trepidation coloring his voice. "The question is, what do we do with that knowledge?" Scientific curiosity eventually overcame his better judgment. After a week of testing on tissue samples, muscle fibers twitching in Petri dishes, neural cultures reorganizing their connections in patterns that defied conventional understanding, Daniel decided to attempt a controlled self-test. "Initiating baseline neural mapping," he recorded, positioning the device at the base of his skull where the brain stem connected to the spinal column. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but anticipation. 3-minute diagnostic scan only, no reconfiguration parameters activated. The logic was sound. A passive scan, purely receptive, with no active signals being transmitted to his nervous system, represented minimal risk. The potential data, however, would be invaluable. A a complete neural map of a living human subject, captured with unprecedented resolution. Commencing scan in 3, 2, 1, he pressed the activation sequence, wincing slightly in anticipation of something, pain, discomfort. But when the device initiated, the sensation was unexpectedly subtle. The device hummed almost imperceptibly as it powered up, a slight warming sensation spreading from the contact point. A whisper of something seemed to travel down his spine, not electricity, not vibration, but something for which his sensory vocabulary had no adequate description. Like the ghost of a sensation not quite materialized. "Fascinating," he murmured, eyes fixed on the incoming data displays. His neural activity displayed on the laboratory screens in complex three-dimensional patterns, a luminous architecture of consciousness rendered visible. Blues and purples for cognitive functions, amber threads for memory access, crimson pulses for emotional responses, emerald networks for sensory processing, a symphony of selfhood translated into light. What he couldn't see was the microscopic change occurring within the device itself, quantum circuitry adjusting to his specific neural signature, establishing resonance patterns that extended beyond his conscious parameters. Each neural pathway he possessed created a corresponding pattern within the device's quantum matrix, a mirror image of his neurological architecture forming in submicroscopic structures too small for his monitoring equipment to detect. When the 3-minute scan completed, Daniel removed the device and began analyzing the collected data. The neural map was extraordinarily detailed, not just brain activity, but complete nervous system architecture, including autonomous functions, hormonal regulators, and even genetic expression patterns. "This goes beyond neural interfacing," he whispered, scrolling through the massive data set. His fingers moved over the holographic displays, expanding sections, rotating complex three-dimensional models of his own neural architecture. "It's mapping the entire biological system at the molecular level. It's seeing everything. Every system, every function, every possibility encoded in my genetic material." Daniel sat back, running hands through his hair as he considered the implications. It's not just reading current neural patterns. It's identifying potential patterns, developmental pathways that could have been activated under different conditions. A startling thought occurred to him. It's seeing alternative expressions of the same genetic code. That night, exhaustion finally claimed him, his body collapsing onto the cot he'd set up in the corner of the warehouse. Sleep came instantly, deeper than any he'd experienced in months. Daniel experienced unusually vivid dreams, complex patterns of light and sensation that seemed to reorganize themselves in flowing sequences. Colors he couldn't name while awake flowed through structures he couldn't comprehend, yet somehow felt intimately familiar. In the dreams, he wasn't observing these patterns. He was them, his consciousness dispersed across configurations of light that seemed to be rewriting themselves in real time. He woke feeling peculiarly energized despite having slept only 5 hours, a subtle vibration seeming to resonate through his body. "Well, that was different," he mumbled, sitting up and stretching. Something felt changed, though he couldn't immediately identify what. His movements felt more fluid somehow, as if his joints had been subtly recalibrated overnight. Even the chronic tension in his lower back, a laboratory worker's occupational hazard, seemed diminished. "Probably just the first decent sleep I've had in weeks," he rationalized, heading to the small washroom he'd constructed in the corner of the warehouse. The cold water against his face felt unusually vivid, each droplet registering with heightened sensitivity against his skin. The first changes appeared that afternoon, so subtle he nearly missed them. While washing his hands after another round of diagnostics on tissue samples, Daniel noticed the texture of his skin seemed different, smoother, with less prominent veins and slightly reduced hair on his forearms. "Must be the lighting," he dismissed, though something about the observation nagged at him. The fluorescent bulbs overhead were the same ones he'd installed weeks ago. Why would they suddenly render his skin differently? He held his hands under the running water, watching how the light played across the surface. The scars from that lab accident 3 years ago, small but distinct burns along his right index finger and thumb, appeared faded, the boundaries between scar tissue and healthy skin less defined than he remembered. "Interesting," he murmured, drying his hands and returning to work. The observation was filed away, curious but not immediately significant compared to the groundbreaking technology he was analyzing. By evening, the changes had become more noticeable. His hands, always efficient but unremarkable, had begun a subtle transformation, fingers appearing slightly longer and more tapered, joints less pronounced, overall appearance more elegant. Even his nails looked different, slightly longer with more defined contours and healthier coloration. "This isn't possible," Daniel murmured, examining his changed hands under the laboratory lights. He flexed his fingers, watching the movement with scientific detachment that barely contained rising alarm. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, as though his hands were refining themselves into more aesthetically harmonious forms. "Computer, display yesterday's biometric scan," he commanded, voice tight with controlled anxiety. The holographic display materialized, showing detailed images of his hands from the previous day's documentation. The comparison was unmistakable. The changes weren't imagined. His hands were different. "What the hell is happening?" he whispered, though part of him already suspected. Returning to the NeuroSync device, he carefully examined it for signs of activation. Under the microscope, the quantum circuitry pattern had definitely changed from his initial documentation. The microscopic architecture, now arranged in configurations he didn't recognize from the original design. Some kind of residual programming, he theorized, connecting diagnostic equipment to the device. His scientific mind provided a framework for processing what might otherwise prompt panic, possibly triggered by the neural mapping protocol. The analysis revealed something remarkable. The device had established a quantum entanglement with his neural patterns, creating a resonance field that continued to influence his biological systems even without direct contact. The brief diagnostic scan had somehow initiated a more comprehensive program within the device itself. "It's not just reading me," he realized with growing astonishment. "It's rewriting me." That night, Daniel dreamt of transformation, cellular structures reconfiguring in complex patterns guided by flowing light. In the dreamscape, he watched as his own body's blueprint was carefully edited, chromosomal instructions reinterpreted, developmental pathways activated that had lain dormant since conception. He was simultaneously observer and subject, scientist and experiment. He woke at 3:17 a.m. to intense tingling across his face and chest, the sensation neither painful nor uncomfortable, but impossible to ignore. It felt like effervescent energy flowing just beneath his skin, as though each cell was vibrating at a frequency slightly different from normal. "Computer lights," he commanded, voice catching in his throat. The warehouse illuminated instantly, clinical brightness revealing what had changed during his sleep. In the bathroom mirror, he confronted the accelerating changes. His facial structure was noticeably altering, jawline softening into a more oval shape, cheekbones becoming more prominent as the underlying architecture refined itself. His eyes appeared larger, not through any change to the organs themselves, but through subtle reshaping of the surrounding structures. His lips had begun filling out, particularly the upper lip, which now curved in a more defined shape. "Fascinating," he whispered, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding personal alarm. His voice itself sounded different. The timbre subtly shifted toward a higher register, though still recognizably his. The most dramatic changes centered on his torso. Removing his t-shirt revealed a body in transition. His shoulders had narrowed perceptibly, while his waist had begun drawing inward, creating a more defined curve between ribcage and hips. The distinction was subtle but unmistakable. His previously straight-lined male physique was developing curves. Most startling was the development beginning in his chest, pectoral muscles softening and redistributing into the initial formation of breasts, the tissue reconfiguring with remarkable biological precision. The areolas had expanded slightly and darkened, nipples becoming more pronounced and centrally positioned on the developing tissue. "The device is rewriting my physiological blueprint," he realized, scientific fascination temporarily overriding alarm. His hands, now noticeably more feminine, moved across the changed terrain of his body with clinical detachment. "This isn't surgical reconstruction or hormonal supplementation. its fundamental cellular reprogramming. The NeuroSync wasn't simply manipulating neural pathways, but had somehow accessed deeper biological programming, perhaps epigenetic controls or developmental regulation systems. It was as though the device had identified an alternative developmental pathway encoded within his DNA and was systematically activating it. It's not creating anything new, he theorized, returning to the main laboratory area and beginning emergency documentation procedures. It's expressing potential that was always there, the female developmental pathway that exists in my genetic code but was suppressed during normal male development. Daniel worked frantically through the remaining night hours, documenting each observable change with scientific precision while monitoring vital signs and neurological activity. His mind remained sharp despite the profound physical changes occurring, cognitive functions unimpaired, while his body reconfigured itself according to patterns the device had somehow identified within his own genetic material. If I can understand the mechanism, he reasoned, I might be able to reverse it. Yet even as he worked, part of him questioned whether reversal was what he truly wanted. The scientist in him was captivated by this unprecedented biological phenomenon, a complete sex transformation occurring naturally at the cellular level without hormones, surgery, or genetic manipulation. Through careful documentation and analysis, Daniel gradually understood what was happening. The device had somehow identified his complete genetic potential, including the female developmental pathways typically suppressed in male physiology, and had initiated a comprehensive rewriting of his biological systems to express that alternative potential. It's as though the device considered all possible expressions of my genetic code and selected an alternative pathway, he theorized, recording observations as changes continued throughout the following day. Not creating something foreign, but activating dormant developmental instructions already present in my DNA. The transformation continued with methodical precision over the following days, each system affected in carefully orchestrated sequence. His hips expanded outward while his waist narrowed further, establishing a distinctly feminine silhouette. The redistribution of adipose tissue followed patterns typical in female physiology, softening angular features while creating characteristic curves at breasts, hips, and thighs. His chest developed into perfectly proportioned breasts, nerve endings multiplying until even slight movements registered with extraordinary sensitivity. When he walked, the unfamiliar weight and motion created sensations that distracted him momentarily from scientific documentation. A complex interplay of physical awareness that had no precedent in his previous experience. The neurological remapping is extraordinary, he noted, adapting quickly to the altered center of gravity and different muscle leverage. Motor control adjustments are occurring automatically, as though the brain is being simultaneously rewritten to accommodate the physiological changes. His skin continued refining throughout his body, texture becoming smoother and softer as subcutaneous fat redistributed in feminine patterns. The slight roughness of male skin gave way to a finer texture with increased tactile sensitivity. Even the scent of his skin changed, the chemical composition of perspiration altering to match typical female patterns. Even his hair transformed, growing at an accelerated rate until it reached past his shoulders, the texture changing from straight and unremarkable to softly waving strands with dimensional coloring that caught the light in ways his former hair never had. The previously unremarkable brown developed subtle highlights, caramel and amber tones that emerged naturally as though they'd always been genetically present but somehow unexpressed. By the 5th day, the transformation had progressed to his reproductive anatomy, a complex reorganization that left him momentarily breathless with its precision. External structures reconfigured with remarkable biological accuracy, folding inward and reshaping to create complete female anatomy. Not a superficial approximation, but fully functional physiological structures indistinguishable from those developed through typical female embryonic pathways. The complexity of this reorganization is beyond anything medically possible, he noted, clinical detachment providing emotional distance from what would otherwise be overwhelming. Vascularization, nerve pathways, tissue differentiation, all reconfiguring spontaneously according to female developmental patterns. Throughout the process, Daniel maintained meticulous scientific documentation, recording each change with clinical detail while struggling to process the profound personal implications. His scientific mind provided a framework for understanding the extraordinary experience, even as his identity underwent its own parallel transformation. Internal changes proceeded with equal precision, hormonal regulation systems reconfiguring to establish typically female patterns, voice box restructuring to produce higher tones, muscle density adjusting to female norms while maintaining proportional strength. Even his skeletal structure underwent subtle refinements, pelvis widening slightly, vertebral curvature adjusting, facial bones remodeling with microscopic precision. "It's as though I'm experiencing compressed female puberty," he noted on the 6th day, voice now distinctly feminine though still carrying recognizable speech patterns and inflections. But with a level of precision that suggests the process is following an idealized developmental pathway rather than random hormone-driven changes. 1 week after the initial scan, the person who stood before the laboratory mirror shared only subtle features with Daniel Matthews. In his place stood a striking woman in her early 30s, with an elegantly proportioned feminine physique and delicate facial features that nevertheless carried echoes of his original appearance, as though Daniel had a twin sister who strongly resembled him while being unmistakably female. His voice had transformed completely, vocal cords reconfiguring to produce a melodious alto that emerged naturally from altered physical structures. Even his movements had changed, his brain rapidly adapting to his transformed center of gravity and different muscle leverage, initial awkwardness giving way to increasingly fluid motion. "The resonance is complete," she noted, voice still startling to her ears despite days of adjustment. The scientific part of her mind remained sharp and analytical, cataloging the transformation with professional detachment that only partially masked the profound personal impact. She turned away from the mirror, returning to the laboratory equipment with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized Daniel's work. The hands that adjusted microscope settings and recorded data now belonged unmistakably to a woman, yet moved with the same practiced precision, muscle memory transcending the transformation of the muscles themselves. Through extensive testing, she determined that the transformation appeared stable and comprehensive. The NeuroSync device had essentially rewritten her biological blueprint at the cellular level, creating a new physiological equilibrium that would maintain itself naturally. Blood tests confirmed complete hormonal reconfiguration, with estrogen, progesterone, and other female hormones now producing at typical levels for a woman of her age. More remarkable was the transformation's completeness, not just surface appearance, but functional biological systems reconfigured with precision that surpassed any known medical technology. From neurological processing to circulatory patterns to reproductive capacity, her body had been remade as though she had developed as female from conception. "This goes beyond sex reassignment," she noted, reviewing the comprehensive data collected throughout the transformation. "This is complete biological reprogramming at the cellular level, as though my developmental history has been retroactively altered while maintaining continuity of consciousness." As days became weeks, Daniel, who gradually began thinking of herself as Diana, faced the profound question of identity. Her memories remained intact, her intellectual capabilities unchanged, her personality fundamentally similar yet experiencing existence through an entirely different physiological framework. "The self transcends physical form," she concluded after extensive self-assessment, yet is simultaneously shaped by the body's experience of reality. The paradox fascinated her scientific mind even as she navigated the practical implications of her transformed existence. Her wardrobe had required complete replacement, Daniel's clothing hanging absurdly from her new proportions. Online shopping provided temporary solutions, delivered to the warehouse without requiring public appearances until she had adapted further. 1 month after the transformation, Diana packed the NeuroSync device into a specialized container, having completed comprehensive documentation of its capabilities and effects. The technology represented something far beyond what even NeuroSync had understood, not just a medical device, but a means of rewriting fundamental human biological expression. The question of what to do with this knowledge weighed heavily. The potential applications were staggering, from treating developmental disorders to gender affirmation to possibly even age reversal. Yet the power to fundamentally reshape human physiology carried ethical implications that extended far beyond corporate patents or personal gain. In her private laboratory journal, Diana documented her final analysis. The NeuroSync technology represents humanity's first true interface with our own biological programming, not through crude genetic manipulation, but through quantum resonance with our developmental systems. The device doesn't change what isn't already present in our genetic potential. It simply allows alternative expressions of existing biological possibilities. My transformation was not the creation of something foreign, but the expression of potential that existed within my genetic architecture from conception, the female developmental pathway that typically remains dormant in those with XY chromosomes. The question remains whether humanity is prepared for technology that so fundamentally challenges our understanding of physical identity as fixed and immutable. The capacity to experience existence across different physiological frameworks while maintaining continuity of consciousness represents an evolutionary threshold we have only begun to comprehend. For now, I will continue my research independently, developing ethical frameworks and safeguards before considering whether and how this technology should become available. My unique perspective, having experienced existence in both male and female physiological frameworks, provides insights that may help navigate the complex territory ahead. The resonance between mind and body, between potential and expression, between past and future selves, reveals that we are far more fluid and adaptable than our traditional understanding of identity has allowed. In that resonance lies both profound opportunity and responsibility. Diana secured her laboratory, the NeuroSync device safely contained while she determined its future. The woman who had begun as Daniel continued forward, navigating a life transformed not just physically, but prospectively, experiencing reality through a fundamentally altered interface while maintaining the thread of consciousness that defined her beyond physical form. The resonance that had transformed her continued in subtler ways, mind and body establishing harmonies that revealed aspects of experience previously inaccessible. Not better or worse, not enhancement or diminishment, but simply different pathways through the complex territory of human existence. As she stepped out into the evening air, Diana felt not loss but expansion. The boundaries of self extended beyond what she had previously imagined possible. The transformation had revealed that identity existed in resonance between mind and matter, between past and present, between potential and expression, a harmony that transcended the limitations of any single form.